At my son's wedding, they replaced my seat with a trash can. That was the moment I realized something in my family had quietly broken long before that day. The ballroom at the Lakeview Grand Hotel glittered with soft lights and white roses, the kind of place where every tablecloth looked pressed within an inch of its life, and the chandeliers shimmered like glass stars overhead. My son Daniel's wedding was supposed to be perfect. I had arrived early, smoothing the sleeves of my navy dress as the string quartet rehearsed near the stage, watching guests drift in with the easy excitement people always bring to weddings. For a moment, I felt proud of the boy I had raised, proud that he had found someone he wanted to build a life with. Daniel used to run through our backyard in Cleveland with scraped knees and grass stains, shouting that one day he'd own a house bigger than mine. Now here he was, 35 years old, standing near the bar in a tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than my first car. I smiled when I saw him. He waved back, though the gesture felt quick, distracted, like he had already moved on to the next person in the room. I told myself that was normal. Weddings are busy things. A young woman at the entrance handed me a small cream-colored place card with my name written in neat cursive, Margaret Collins. I thanked her and walked into the reception hall, scanning the round tables arranged in careful rows across the polished floor. Table 7, the card said. I remember thinking that was a good sign, close enough to the front to see everything clearly. The band was warming up with a quiet piano melody, and waiters moved between tables adjusting silverware so precisely that each fork aligned perfectly with the plate. It all looked beautiful. Too beautiful, maybe. Because when I reached table 7, I stopped walking. At first I thought I had the wrong table. The other guests' chairs were there. White cushions, satin ribbons tied neatly around the backs. But where my chair should have been, there was something else. A small stainless steel trash can. The kind you might see beside a desk in an office. It sat directly under my place card, as if someone had placed it there carefully, deliberately. For a few seconds I simply stared at it, waiting for the scene to rearrange itself into something that made sense. But nothing changed. A few people nearby noticed me standing there. One man coughed softly, pretending to look at his phone. Another woman whispered something to her husband and quickly looked away. Then I heard heels tapping across the floor behind me. Ashley's voice came next, bright and amused. Oh good, you found your seat. I turned slowly. My daughter-in-law looked radiant in her ivory reception dress, a glass of champagne balanced effortlessly in her hand. She followed my gaze to the trash can and laughed lightly, the way someone laughs at a harmless prank. Relax, Margaret, she said with a small shrug. It's just a joke. Don't be so dramatic. Around us, a few guests chuckled politely. Someone muttered, "That's funny," under their breath. I looked past Ashley then, across the room, until I found Daniel. My son was watching from near the bar. When our eyes met, he hesitated for half a second. Then he glanced down at his drink and turned away. I did not argue. I did not ask Ashley what kind of joke required a trash can where a mother was supposed to sit. Instead, I looked at the small silver bin for a moment longer. Then I gently placed my purse on the empty chair beside the table and pulled another chair slightly closer, the kind of quiet adjustment that does not interrupt a celebration. No one stopped me. No one offered to fix the mistake. The music continued as if nothing unusual had happened. A waiter passed by carrying a tray of champagne glasses that clinked softly together like distant wind chimes. I sat down slowly and folded my hands in my lap. Across the room, Daniel laughed at something one of his groomsmen said. The sound easy and relaxed, the same laugh he used to make when he was 10 years old and trying to convince me he had finished his homework before dinner. For a moment, I wondered if perhaps he would walk over, notice the situation, and correct it. But he did not. Ashley had already moved on to greet another group of guests, her smile bright and confident, the kind of smile people trust immediately. The trash can remain beside me like an awkward decoration no one wanted to mention. I heard two women behind me whisper quietly. One of them said that she thought it must be some kind of inside joke. The other answered that Ashley had a very playful personality. I watched the candles flicker at the center of the table and reminded myself to breathe slowly. Weddings are emotional days. People say strange things when they are nervous. I told myself it would pass. The band shifted from soft piano to a light jazz tune, and the room slowly filled with conversation again. Glasses clinked. Chairs moved. Laughter drifted across the ballroom in waves. Everything looked exactly like a joyful celebration should look, except that every few minutes someone glanced toward me and then quickly looked away again. That was when I realized something important. The problem was not the trash can. The problem was that too many people already knew it was there. I noticed a young man at the next table lean toward his friend and say quietly, "That must be his mother." The friend nodded as if he understood something I did not. I picked up the place card with my name on it and turned it slowly between my fingers. Margaret Collins. I had seen that name on school permission slips, grocery store checks, birthday cards, and every mortgage payment that kept a roof over Daniel's head when he was growing up. For 35 years that name had meant mother. But tonight it seemed to mean something different to the people in this room. I looked again toward the bar. Daniel was speaking with Ashley now. She leaned close to him and whispered something that made him smile awkwardly. He glanced in my direction once more, only for a second. Then he lifted his glass and took a long sip. The bandleader tapped the microphone and announced that dinner would begin in a few minutes. Guests applauded politely. Plates were placed neatly in front of us. A waiter filled my water glass and gave me a brief, sympathetic nod that he probably hoped I would not notice. I appreciated the gesture anyway, because at that moment I understood something very clearly. This was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a performance. And the strangest part was that everyone in the room seemed to know the script except me. I kept my hands folded on the table while the waiters began serving dinner, moving gracefully between the tables with polished trays and quiet efficiency. The scent of roasted chicken and buttered vegetables filled the room, warm and comforting, the kind of smell that usually made a celebration feel real. But tonight, everything felt strangely distant, as if I were watching the evening through a sheet of glass. People around me chatted about travel plans and work schedules and the beauty of the ceremony earlier that afternoon. Someone complimented the floral arrangements. Another guest praised the dessert menu printed in gold lettering. I listened without really hearing them. Every few minutes someone at the table glanced toward the small trash can beside my chair and then quickly looked back down at their plate. One woman tried to start a polite conversation with me about the weather in Cleveland, but her voice carried that careful tone people use when they are unsure whether something embarrassing should be acknowledged or ignored. I answered kindly and kept my voice steady. After all, the woman had not placed the trash can there. She was simply caught in the same uncomfortable moment as everyone else. Across the ballroom, the head table had filled with laughter. Daniel sat beside Ashley, leaning close whenever someone approached to offer congratulations. The photographer circled them like a quiet bird, capturing smiles and raised glasses and the bright glow of newly married happiness. Ashley looked radiant under the soft lights. Every time she laughed, she tilted her head slightly to the side, a gesture that made people lean in closer as if they had been invited into a private joke. It was a small talent she had always possessed. She knew how to make people feel included. I remembered the first time Daniel introduced her to me nearly 5 years ago at a small cafe near Lake Erie. She had been charming then too. She asked thoughtful questions about Daniel's childhood and laughed warmly when I told a story about the time he tried to build a treehouse that collapsed before sunset. I remember thinking that she had an easy confidence that would serve her well in life. And for a while, everything seemed pleasant. Sunday dinners became lively again. Daniel called more often. Ashley brought homemade desserts and insisted on helping with the dishes. If there were small changes later, they arrived slowly enough that I did not question them at first. Invitations to family events started arriving later than usual, sometimes only a day or two before the gathering. Conversations would pause when I entered the room, followed by quick smiles and explanations that nothing important had been discussed. Ashley began describing me jokingly as dramatic whenever I expressed concern about something small, like a missed phone call or a forgotten birthday card. Each moment by itself seemed harmless, a tiny misunderstanding that would pass with time. But sitting there at table 7 while the wedding guests laughed and the band played a cheerful tune, those small moments began lining up in my mind like puzzle pieces clicking quietly into place. The whispers I heard earlier suddenly made sense. The glances from strangers. The polite laughter when Ashley said it was only a joke. Someone had planned this moment long before tonight. Someone had decided that the mother of the groom would become part of the evening's entertainment. I lifted my water glass and took a slow sip while the bandleader stepped forward to announce the first toast of the evening. Guests turned their chairs toward the head table, eager to hear the speeches that always bring laughter and a few sentimental tears. As the room settled into silence, I noticed something else that made the situation clearer than any whisper could have. Daniel never once looked toward my table again. I listened as the best man began his speech, his voice confident and cheerful as he spoke about friendship, loyalty, and the bright future waiting for Daniel and Ashley. The guests laughed in the right places and applauded when he finished, the sound filling the ballroom like a warm wave. I clapped politely with everyone else, my hands moving slowly while my thoughts drifted somewhere much quieter. Because while the room celebrated the beginning of a new marriage, my mind had started walking backward through the past several years, revisiting small moments that once seemed harmless. I remembered the first Thanksgiving after Daniel moved into the house Ashley had chosen for them outside Chicago. The drive from Cleveland took almost 5 hours, and I arrived carrying a homemade apple pie that had been Daniel's favorite since he was a boy. Ashley greeted me warmly at the door that day, but when dinner was served she laughed and told the table that Daniel always said I worried too much about traditions. Everyone chuckled, and Daniel smiled in that uncertain way he sometimes had when he did not know whether to defend me or keep the mood light. I had told myself it was nothing, just a joke. The next Christmas, there was another small moment. Ashley organized a large holiday party for Daniel's colleagues, and when I offered to help cook, she gently suggested that I relax instead, explaining that modern gatherings were simpler when everything came from a catering service. I spent most of that evening sitting quietly in the living room while people I had never met admired the decorations and talked about work. When someone asked Ashley how long she had known Daniel's family, she laughed and said she was still learning how dramatic mothers could be. The word dramatic floated around the room like a harmless balloon, and again everyone smiled. I smiled too. That was the strange part about the past few years. None of the moments felt serious enough to confront. Each one arrived wrapped in humor, softened by laughter, disguised as a misunderstanding. Ashley had a gift for that. She could say something sharp and make it sound playful at the same time. Daniel slowly began repeating the same word whenever I questioned something unusual. Dramatic. If I asked why a family dinner had been scheduled without telling me until the night before, he would laugh and say I was overthinking things. If I mentioned that Ashley rarely returned my phone calls, he would assure me she was simply busy. I wanted to believe him. Daniel had always been a kind boy. When he was 8 years old, he once spent an entire Saturday helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries because she struggled with the steps to her porch. That was the son I remembered. That was the son I expected to see tonight when I walked into this ballroom. But as the speeches continued and the guests laughed at another story from Daniel's college years, I began to understand something more clearly than before. The small moments I had dismissed over the years had not been accidents. They had been rehearsals. Each joke, each comment, each quiet exclusion had prepared everyone for this evening, for the moment when the mother of the groom would become a polite source of entertainment. I glanced again at the stainless steel trash can beside my chair. It was polished, enough that the soft light from the chandeliers reflected faintly across its surface. Someone had even placed a folded napkin inside it, as if to complete the decoration. I wondered briefly how long it had been sitting there before I arrived. An hour perhaps, maybe longer. Long enough for several people to notice and laugh quietly among themselves. Long enough for Ashley to feel confident that when I discovered it, the room would already understand the joke. The master of ceremonies stepped forward and announced that the bride would now give a short speech of her own. Applause rose again as Ashley stood gracefully beside Daniel, lifting her glass of champagne while the photographer positioned himself nearby. Her smile was bright and practiced as she looked across the crowd of friends, colleagues, and relatives who had gathered to celebrate the beginning of her new life. And for the first time that evening, her eyes finally drifted toward table 7 where I was sitting. Ashley lifted her glass, and the room slowly quieted, the soft clinking of silverware fading as people turned their chairs toward the head table. She thanked everyone for coming, her voice smooth and confident as it carried through the speakers. She spoke about love, about new beginnings, about the importance of family support. Each sentence sounded thoughtful and warm, the kind of words people expect to hear at a wedding. Guests nodded and smiled while she described how Daniel had changed her life and how grateful she felt to be surrounded by friends and relatives who had helped make the evening possible. I listened carefully, not because the speech surprised me, but because I had begun to notice something else entirely. Ashley knew how to hold a room. She paused at exactly the right moments, allowing laughter or applause to rise before continuing. She mentioned Daniel's colleagues, his college friends, and her own parents sitting proudly at the front table. Then she began thanking the people who had contributed to the wedding itself. The event planner received a warm round of applause. The catering team received another. When she mentioned the band, several guests cheered playfully. Then she said something that caused a few heads to turn toward my table. Ashley smiled gently and said that none of this beautiful evening would have been possible without the generous support of family members who believed in Daniel and her future together. She did not say my name. She simply gestured in the general direction of the room with a graceful sweep of her hand. A few people clapped politely while glancing toward table 7 again, their expressions shifting somewhere between amusement and curiosity. I understood the meaning immediately. The wedding had been expensive. The ballroom, the catering, the music, the decorations, the honeymoon Daniel and Ashley planned to take in Napa Valley the following week. I had quietly covered a large portion of those costs because Daniel told me it would help them begin their life without financial stress. He had thanked me sincerely when we spoke about it months earlier in my kitchen back in Cleveland. But hearing Ashley describe those contributions as anonymous generosity felt strangely different. It was as if the help had come from somewhere distant and abstract rather than from the mother who raised him. I noticed a man at the next table lean toward his companion and whisper something that made both of them smile awkwardly. The woman beside me shifted in her chair and finally spoke to me in a low voice. She said she hoped I was enjoying the evening. Her tone carried the gentle kindness people offer when they sense someone has been placed in an uncomfortable position. I thanked her and told her the celebration was beautiful. And in truth, it was beautiful. The lights glowed warmly across the dance floor. Waiters refilled glasses with quiet efficiency. Daniel stood beside Ashley looking proud and happy, the same boy I had once watched ride his first bicycle down our driveway on a bright summer afternoon. Yet the longer I sat there, the clearer everything became. The trash can beside my chair was not the only message placed at table 7 that evening. The real message was the silence around it. No one from the family came over to move it away. No one suggested that perhaps the joke had gone too far. Even Daniel remained focused on the head table, smiling politely as Ashley finished her speech and raised her glass for a toast. The guests lifted their glasses as well, a sea of crystal catching the chandelier light. To new beginnings, Ashley said brightly. The room echoed the toast with cheerful enthusiasm. I lifted my own glass of water and held it for a moment before taking a slow sip. As the applause faded and the band prepared to start the first dance, I noticed someone approaching my table from across the ballroom. It was Robert Hayes, my late husband's closest friend, a tall man with silver hair who had known Daniel since he was a toddler. Robert moved carefully through the crowd until he reached my chair, his eyes resting briefly on the trash can beside me before meeting my gaze with quiet understanding. Robert Hayes stopped beside my chair and rested one hand lightly on the back of the empty seat next to me, the one that should have been mine from the beginning. He did not say anything at first. His eyes moved from my face to the small stainless steel trash can beside the table, then back again. Robert had always been a careful man, the kind who thought before speaking. When my husband was alive, the two of them spent many evenings sitting on our back porch in Cleveland discussing work, baseball, and the strange ways the world changed faster every year. Robert had been there the day Daniel learned to ride a bicycle without training wheels. He had been there at Daniel's high school graduation. And he had been there at my husband's funeral 3 years ago, standing quietly beside me while the wind moved through the trees at the cemetery. Now he pulled out the empty chair next to me and sat down slowly. The music began again across the ballroom as Daniel and Ashley stepped onto the dance floor for their first dance. The room dimmed slightly, and the soft glow of the chandeliers reflected across the polished floor like ripples on water. Guests turned their attention toward the couple, smiling and raising their phones to capture the moment. For several seconds Robert watched the dance in silence. Then he leaned slightly closer and spoke in a voice low enough that no one else at the table could hear. He said that he had arrived early that evening and noticed something unusual while the staff prepared the tables. He said the trash can had already been placed there before most guests entered the ballroom. He told me he thought it must be a mistake at first. But then he overheard a conversation near the entrance between two of Ashley's friends. They were laughing about a prank she had planned for the reception. Robert paused for a moment, as if deciding how much to say. Finally, he told me that one of the women joked that Ashley had waited weeks to pull this off. She said the bride thought it would be hilarious to give the mother of the groom a seat that matched her attitude. Robert looked down at the tablecloth while he spoke, the lines around his eyes tightening slightly with concern. I felt a strange calm settle over me as he finished. The music drifted across the ballroom, while Daniel guided Ashley slowly across the dance floor, the photographer circling them to capture every graceful turn. People clapped softly in rhythm with the song. No one seemed aware of the quiet conversation happening at table 7. I thanked Robert for telling me the truth. He shook his head and said he wished he had stopped it earlier, but by the time he realized it was intentional, the guests had already begun arriving. I told him there was nothing he could have done, because the truth was that the moment had already accomplished what it was meant to accomplish. Ashley wanted the room to laugh. She wanted the story to travel from table to table, carried by whispers and polite smiles. The trash can beside my chair was only the symbol. The real message had been delivered hours earlier when she decided I would become the evening's quiet joke. Robert studied my expression carefully, as if expecting anger or tears. Instead, I lifted my water glass again and took a slow sip while watching Daniel and Ashley finish their dance. The guests applauded warmly as the music faded. Daniel kissed his bride's cheek while the band prepared to start a livelier song for the rest of the guests. The celebration continued without pause. I turned slightly toward Robert and told him something that surprised even me when I heard the words leave my mouth. I said that Ashley was right about one thing. It was a joke. I simply had not realized yet how expensive that joke was going to become. The band shifted into a livelier song and guests began drifting toward the dance floor in small groups, laughter rising again as the tension of the speeches faded into the warm rhythm of the celebration. Daniel and Ashley moved easily among their friends, greeting relatives, accepting congratulations, posing for photographs. From table 7, I watched the evening continue as if nothing unusual had happened at all. That was the curious thing about gatherings like this. When enough people choose to ignore something uncomfortable, it quietly disappears from the story. The trash can beside my chair remained where it was, but the room had already decided it was harmless. Robert stayed beside me for a few minutes longer, then excused himself to greet an old colleague near the bar. I assured him I was fine. In truth, I felt calmer than I had earlier in the evening. Not happier, but clearer. The music grew louder as more guests filled the dance floor. A young couple spun past our table, laughing while a waiter replaced empty glasses with fresh ones. Someone at another table called out Daniel's name and raised a toast from across the room. The wedding had settled into that comfortable stage where the schedule loosens and people simply enjoy themselves. I rested my hands lightly on the tablecloth and looked again at the small stainless steel trash can beside my chair. Under the soft lights, it reflected the room in a distorted curve, bending the shapes of dancing guests and glowing chandeliers into something unfamiliar. For a moment, I thought about how easily objects become symbols when people decide they should. A chair is simply a place to sit. A trash can is simply a container. But tonight someone had decided that one represented belonging and the other represented something else entirely. I remembered the conversation Daniel and I had months earlier when he asked if I could help them with the wedding expenses. He had driven to Cleveland on a rainy Saturday afternoon, and we sat at my kitchen table drinking coffee while he explained that the ceremony Ashley dreamed about would cost more than they expected. I told him I wanted the day to be special for them and that I would help where I could. Daniel looked relieved then. He said he would never forget the support. Sitting in the ballroom now, watching him laugh with a group of co-workers near the dance floor, I wondered whether he still remembered that conversation at all. The bandleader announced the next song and invited couples to join the dance floor. A few guests clapped enthusiastically. I remained where I was, listening to the music and observing the room with quiet patience. Because once the noise of embarrassment fades, something interesting happens. People begin revealing who they truly are. I noticed how some guests avoided table 7 completely, choosing seats farther away, even though several chairs remained empty nearby. Others glanced toward me with polite curiosity, but never approached. And every so often someone would look briefly at the trash can beside my chair before quickly pretending they had not seen it. Their reactions told me more than words ever could. Across the room, Ashley laughed again, her hand resting lightly on Daniel's arm while she spoke to a group of friends. She looked confident, satisfied, completely certain that the evening was unfolding exactly as she planned. I felt no urge to interrupt the celebration or confront anyone in the middle of the ballroom. Moments like that rarely change anything. Instead, I simply watched the dance floor fill with guests while the band played another cheerful tune. Because the truth about jokes is that people usually measure them by how much laughter they create in the moment. What they forget is that some jokes take time before their real cost becomes visible. The evening continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of music, laughter, and clinking glasses. From a distance, the celebration looked flawless, the kind of wedding people would remember fondly for years. The chandeliers glowed softly above the dance floor while the band played a familiar melody that drew more couples into the center of the room. Daniel and Ashley moved through the crowd with easy confidence, stopping every few steps to greet another group of guests. I watched them the way someone watches a play they have already seen before, paying attention not only to the actors, but to the small details in the background that most people overlook. After a while, Robert returned briefly to my table and asked if I needed anything. I thanked him again for earlier and told him I was perfectly fine. He nodded slowly, still glancing at the small trash can beside my chair, then gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze before heading back toward the bar. I remained seated, listening to the music and studying the room with quiet patience. There was something strangely peaceful about observing the celebration without participating in it. When people believe a story is finished, they stop looking for what comes next. And tonight, everyone in that ballroom believed the story had already ended with a joke. I remembered another conversation from months earlier, one that had seemed simple at the time. Daniel had called me late one evening after work and asked if I could meet with him and Ashley during a visit to Chicago. We sat together in a small restaurant near the river where Ashley described the wedding venue she loved and the vision she had for the ceremony. She spoke with excitement about the ballroom, the flowers, the music, and the photographs they would treasure forever. I told them I wanted the day to be everything they imagined. When Daniel hesitated before discussing the budget, I reassured him that helping them begin their life together would make me happy. I had spent decades building financial security after my husband passed away. Supporting my son felt natural. At the time, Daniel promised he would never forget my generosity. Sitting there now, watching him laugh across the room with friends who likely believed the evening had been funded entirely by the couple themselves, I wondered if memory had simply become inconvenient for him. A server approached my table and quietly replaced the water pitcher with a fresh one. His polite nod carried a hint of sympathy that he probably hoped I would not notice. I smiled and thanked him anyway, because kindness often appears in small gestures when people feel powerless to correct a larger situation. The band began another upbeat song and the dance floor filled again with movement and color. Someone near the entrance shouted playfully that it was time for the bride and groom to join the party again. Ashley raised her glass and laughed, her voice bright as she encouraged everyone to celebrate. Daniel followed her toward the dance floor once more. For a brief moment his eyes moved across the room and landed near table 7. He looked away almost immediately. That small reaction told me more than any explanation could have. It meant he understood exactly what had happened tonight, and it meant he had chosen silence. I folded my hands gently on the table and allowed myself one last look around the ballroom. The music, the laughter, the glittering lights, the smiling faces of people who believed they were witnessing the beginning of a happy marriage. It truly was a beautiful evening. Ashley had created exactly the celebration she wanted. But as I sat quietly beside the polished trash can reflecting the lights of the room, another realization settled calmly in my mind. Celebrations often mark the beginning of something new. And sometimes the beginning they mark is not the one anyone expected. The music continued long after the moment of embarrassment had passed for everyone except me. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and the dance floor filled with spinning couples who moved under the warm chandelier light, as if the evening had always been perfect. From a distance, the reception looked like the kind of celebration people would describe later with smiling nostalgia. I remained seated at table 7 for a while longer, watching quietly as the night unfolded around me. Eventually, the band slowed the tempo, and several older relatives began gathering their coats near the entrance. The energy of the room softened slightly, shifting from excitement to comfortable conversation. I decided that was my moment to leave. I stood slowly, smoothing the fabric of my navy dress before picking up my purse from the chair beside me. The small stainless steel trash can remained exactly where it had been placed hours earlier, reflecting the golden lights of the ballroom in its curved surface. For a second I studied that reflection. It captured a distorted image of the entire room, bending the shapes of guests and tables into something almost unrecognizable. In a strange way it felt fitting, because the evening had done something similar to my understanding of my own family. I turned away from the table and began walking toward the exit. A few guests nodded politely as I passed them. One woman murmured that she hoped I had enjoyed the celebration. I thanked her with a calm smile. Near the door Robert Hayes appeared again, as if he had been quietly watching to make sure I did not leave without saying goodbye. He offered to walk me to my car, but I assured him I would be fine. The hotel parking area was only a short distance away, and the night air outside looked cool and peaceful compared to the noise inside the ballroom. Before I stepped outside, I paused for one last glance back into the room. Daniel stood near the center of the dance floor with Ashley and several friends, laughing as someone attempted an overly enthusiastic spin. The photographer's flash illuminated the moment, freezing their bright smiles for another photograph that would eventually appear in an album of perfect memories. For a brief moment, I wondered if Daniel would notice me leaving, but his attention never shifted toward the doorway. The glass doors closed softly behind me as I stepped into the quiet Chicago night. The sound of music faded immediately, replaced by the gentle hum of traffic from the street beyond the hotel entrance. Cool air brushed against my face, and for the first time that evening I allowed myself to breathe deeply. I walked slowly across the parking lot toward my car, the gravel crunching softly beneath my shoes. As I unlocked the door, I thought again about the conversation Daniel and I once had in my kitchen when he asked for help paying for this very celebration. At the time I believed I was supporting the beginning of his future. Tonight had revealed something else entirely. I started the engine and sat for a moment watching the lights of the hotel shimmer across the windshield. Inside that ballroom the music continued and guests celebrated a new marriage, unaware that the small joke they had laughed at earlier had quietly changed something much larger. Because respect, once lost, does not return simply because people pretend the moment never happened. I placed my hands on the steering wheel and allowed a small, thoughtful smile to form as the engine settled into a steady hum. Ashley had been right about one thing. It had been a joke, but some jokes reveal far more than the people telling them ever expect. In this emotional storytelling journey, a mother arrives at her son's wedding expecting love and respect, only to discover a humiliating surprise waiting at her seat. What begins as a quiet moment of embarrassment slowly unfolds into a powerful reflection on dignity, family loyalty, and the hidden dynamics that shape family relationships. As the mother of the groom watches the celebration continue around her, she begins to understand how subtle manipulation and polite laughter can hide deeper truths about respect and belonging. Meanwhile, the bride of her son maintains a confident smile, treating the moment as harmless humor while guests quietly observe the tension in the room. This narrative explores the quiet strength of a parent who chooses calm observation over confrontation and reveals how moments of public humiliation can transform into powerful realizations about self-worth and boundaries. Through thoughtful storytelling and emotionally grounded narration, this video stands among the most compelling family stories about generational conflict, social respect, and the complicated bonds between parents and adult children. The unfolding events highlight how seemingly small actions can reveal deeper attitudes within a household and why dignity often speaks louder than anger. As the mother reflects on years of sacrifice and support, the evening becomes a turning point that reshapes how she sees her place within the family. Viewers who appreciate deeply reflective family stories will recognize the authenticity of the emotions and the realism of the social dynamics portrayed throughout the narrative. This story also captures the quiet power of patience, showing how a calm response can reveal more truth than confrontation ever could, making it a memorable addition to powerful family stories centered on respect, legacy, and personal boundaries. By focusing on the perspective of the mother and the subtle behavior of the bride of her son, the story explores how silence, observation, and reflection can expose the true character of those around us. The emotional depth and relatable experiences presented here make it one of the most engaging family stories for audiences who appreciate thoughtful storytelling about family honor, personal strength, and the lessons that difficult moments can reveal. Ultimately, this narrative reminds us that family stories often reveal more than simple celebrations or conflicts. They uncover the deeper truths about loyalty, respect, and the quiet courage required to face moments that change how we see the people closest to us. Character 1. A dignified white American woman about 68 years old. Front-facing portrait. Calm, composed expression. Silver shoulder-length hair. Wearing an elegant navy blue wedding reception dress. Natural realistic lighting. Photorealistic human skin texture. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. Character 2. A confident white American woman about 32 years old. Front-facing portrait. Elegant bride with smooth blonde hair and sharp, confident expression. Wearing a refined white wedding reception dress. Natural realistic lighting. Photorealistic human skin texture. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration.